Madam Chair.
I call the Honourable Michael Woodhouse.
Madam Chair, I'd also like to acknowledge the Chair of the Health Select Committee because she did a tremendous job and does a tremendous job. Actually, she's a very effective Labor member of this House, and I am surprised she isn't further up the totem pole. In frankly a shallow puddle of talent over there. I would have thought she was much higher ranked, but she certainly did a very good job in sometimes trying circumstances, because the National Caucus started in good faith in support of the goals of this bill. And there are three goals: the descheduling of cannabidiol, the terminal exemption, the temporary terminal exemption from prosecution for those who are terminally ill, and the licensing framework. And the National Party actually supports all three of those goals. And it's a measure of the intellectual poverty inherent in this bill that, despite being able to support those goals, it can't support this bill. And as the Leader of the Opposition said, we're also open to the idea of a conversation in this country about the decriminalising of cannabis more generally. Now, we need to tread very carefully through that, because depending on the way in which the conversation is articulated, we'll have, I think, a very different outcome. So we do need to be cautious. But the sad thing is, we've actually started and ended that conversation in a way through the passage of this legislation. We have conflated the decriminalising of illicit substances with the licensing regime for medicinal cannabis. And that is to the shame of a lazy government and a lazy minister. Let's go through this. Firstly, the temporary exemption from prosecution.
Just remind the member, there is a Speaker's ruling that interjection should be rare, reasonable and witty, and none of those to date have met any one of those three tests. Sorry to interrupt the member.
The memory of H.W. Ross Robertson has just come back into the House. That's quite right, especially the witty bit. The temporary exemption from prosecution, when this bill is passed, is anything but temporary. The policy statement, the explanatory note, said that this exemption would only be in place until such time as an effective licensing regime and high-quality medicinal cannabis products were on the market. So it follows that there should be a sunset on that provision. No. The Select Committee discussed it, the Committee of the whole House discussed it, the Minister rejected it, the Government rejected it. Why? Well, it's open to speculation about whether the de facto decriminalising of illicit substances through the passage of this legislation is an accident or intended. And without bringing the gallery in, I noticed the applause when the Leader of the Opposition suggested that was exactly what was happening when we passed this bill. What I describe as an island of immunity and an archipelago of offending will cause no end of trouble for Mr O'Connor's former colleagues in New Zealand Police, who came along and told us that they aren't chasing and hunting down and arresting and jailing terminally ill people who have a joint for their pain. But they are interested in the supply chain. So look out for that. And the Minister and the Government still haven't answered the question of what happens to somebody who's terminally ill, who smokes a joint outside a school, or a shopping mall, or a movie theatre. What are they going to do? Give them a pass under the Misuse of Drugs Act, but prosecute them under the Smoke-Free Environments Act? I doubt it. I sincerely doubt it. And the ministers, in fact, the member based in Invercargill, Dr Liz Craig, did the Ministers' Working Committee by pointing out that the government's alternative to a sunset clause was a review. A review in 2 years, report back in 3. On what? On what amendments to these provisions would be required. Not whether the provisions have gone past their sell-by date and should be repealed, in which case we've got to come back to this House and do just that, because there is no sunset clause. No, it only talks about whatever amendments are necessary. The inference to that is that this is anything but a temporary exemption. So anybody who's terminally ill can smoke illicit substances till doomsday. Well, till their doomsday, to put some gallows humour onto it. Now, the licensing regime. The famous 59 words. Got a few more when we came out of the Committee of the Whole, but a paucity of information about what that should be. And the Minister's response was twofold. One, look at Section 37 of the Misuse of Drugs Act and trust us. So, here are some questions that at this very 11th hour we still don't know the answers to. What will happen to somebody who wants to put a manufacturing process close to a school, in the middle of a residential area? Will the manufacturing entity be an outside process or an indoor process? What is the fitness to hold the licence? No idea. Will it involve, this is crucial, will it involve loose leaf? Will that complete oxymoron of a medicine that is rolled up and smoked be allowed under the medicinal cannabis regime? Not the temporary exemption, not the terminal exemption. And the Minister, obsessed. The member says, I'm obsessed by this question. Well, I'm sorry, it's a pretty fundamental question. Are we decriminalising loose leaf cannabis use or not? Because I don't know, I'm no doctor, Doc Retty can address this, Dr Craig could, but it seems to me that the smoking of what was previously an illicit substance for a chronic condition, and bear in mind we're not talking about terminally ill once this licensing regime is in place, we're talking about anybody whom the GP or the doctor, the prescribing person, deems will benefit from this product. And the ingestion process is relevant. But no, not a dicky bird on whether or not smoked loose leaf will be part of the licensing regime. And what manufacturing standards will be required for the people who hold the licence? No idea. None whatsoever. Well, the answer to the question is, guess what? We're going to set up another committee, a ministerial oversight group. So this was a high priority for the government. It was in the 100-day plan. We've had a year to think about it. And all of the detail is being delegated not only to officials, but to another oversight group. Add that to the 200+ we've already got. And I have some significant concerns about the relationship between this change and our land transport rules and the effect that this will have on road safety. Because while the principal change is a licensing framework, there is no doubt that the effect is the same, whether it's illicit or prescribed. Drugged driving is a massive risk on our road. And if we have a look at the jurisdictions, I'm advised that in those jurisdictions where cannabis was decriminalised, deaths from drugged driving went up considerably, and in some jurisdictions is greater than alcohol harm on their roads. And that is going to come to a highway near us. Why? Because we haven't even engaged transport officials on that crucial question. We haven't engaged New Zealand police about a per se test and whether there's a high enough correlation between the presence of THC and evidence of impairment. It's been a problem in illicit use. It's not going to get any easier just because it's prescribed. And of course, we did have the nonsense of and indeed today, the combined select committees of Health and Māori Affairs have reported back to this House on its progress in achieving the goal of being smoke-free 2025. Well, we can throw that goal completely out the window. Challenging though it was, it's gone now, because tobacco is deemed more harmful than cannabis. I feel like I'm in a parallel universe. It really is. And the government are about to outlaw smoking in cars with children, but it'll be okay to take prescription cannabis. Where are we? What a complete schmozzle. I also want to add my thanks to those submitters, to those members of the medicinal cannabis industry who are ready, willing and able to create a safe, high-quality manufacturing process with exactly the sort of rules and boundaries they want, these rules and boundaries, that the government is not prepared to say should be part of the regime. And I wish them all the very best in developing that, and I hope they're not going to do it in the sort of policy vacuum that exists as we pass this bill. It's bad law, and it should not proceed.
I call Jenny Marcroft.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure.